What's up, everybody? Hey, here's another SPORTS-REUBEN-LIFE, and I want to get right into it. This is going to be the recap of the UFC 244. There's so much to unpack here. It's ridiculous. This video might run a little bit long, but whatever, right? There's no real rules to this whole thing. So, before I say all that, if you're new to here, this is going to be the first part of the second part series. First part's on YouTube, second part's on Facebook. Check out the Facebook one. It's going to be recapping the Canelo versus Kovalev fight and the Ryan Garcia versus Duno fight. So those two fights are going to be recapped on my Facebook page. Go check those out. The link's going to be below. But this is going to be the recap of UFC 244. That being said, like, subscribe, do all that crazy stuff. Please do that. Follow, a thumbs up, give me a comment. If you don't like it, whatever. So anyways, let me get right into it. Okay, UFC 244 was tremendous on many levels. One, let's get before I start talking about Nate Diaz and Masvidal and why I know they should get a rematch, is let's recap all the stuff that I talked about on the preview, right? The one person that didn't have a big name that really showed out was Johnny Walker's opponent, right? Johnny Walker was supposed to be, they liked him, he's charismatic, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Corey Anderson had a checkered history. He wasn't really that proven. He came out in Madison Square Garden where all the stars were at, sold out crowd, $6 million gate. What did he do? He beat Johnny Walker. He showed out. He did some funky dance at the end, but it was tremendous, right? He came and everybody remembered that, and he came out and he had an opportunity to make a name for himself, and he did it. He made a name for himself. He got people to notice him on the biggest stage, and that was a hugely important thing, okay? Now, one of the biggest losers in this whole situation is, I'm going to bounce around, but I'm not going to talk about the Masvidal and Nate Diaz until the end of this, right? So, the biggest loser, I think, in this whole thing was Kelvin Gastelum. That guy fought for the championship belt. He came in, he just got beat. Darren Till, if you watch the post-fight was 2 hours and 12 minutes long, which is unusual for a post-fight to be that long for UFC, but there was a bunch of information, there was a bunch of tidbits of information in there. He talked about Darren Till, who beat Gastelum. He had all these delays, and he almost wasn't going to get his visa, and he had trouble weight cutting. And he said that he was hurt. He even expressed, it was so interesting on the post-fight, you should really watch that. He expressed how he was so nervous about the fight that he was looking for a way out. He was looking for a way to get out of the fight, to fake an injury so that way he didn't have to fight. That's how nervous he was about how many things went wrong for him, and his confidence was real low after the loss, and he wasn't really feeling the fight. Everything wasn't in his favor, right? So you contrast it with Kelvin Gastelum, who said that if Darren Till doesn't come to fight, he's not going to fight anybody. In other words, the conditions have to be perfect for somebody like Kelvin Gastelum. Darren Till had everything go wrong for him, and he still went out there and got the victory. Does that always happen? No, of course not. That doesn't always happen. But it's a good example. It's a good message to send that even though things don't happen perfectly, you still should go forward and try your best. Darren Till went out there. He said he got his confidence back. He could beat anybody, and that's what you want to see, right? You want to see a scrapper. You know, the whole point of these these pugilistic events is you want to be able to see the adversity, the challenge. The most interesting fights are when things go well and they go bad, and the person can come back from that. So I think that's an interesting dynamic of these UFC fights, what makes them so compelling, why so many people like to watch these things, right? Why they've kind of surpassed boxing, right? So another interesting observation is you had Derek Lewis win. You had Stephen Thompson win. You had Darren Till. All these known names got the victory. And so these were veterans that had a couple losses recently. They basically rebounded, and they put themselves in a positive, in a good position, right? It was very interesting, that fight. This whole fight card had a bunch of gems in it, right? But Corey Anderson, to me, stood out the most as somebody that didn't have a big name. He won the Ultimate Fighter, but he was still having kind of trouble with traction, and, you know, and getting traction and and increasing his popularity. No doubt ESPN is going to do a piece on him. If I was ESPN, that's the first thing I would do, is I want to know who this guy is. He got the victory. He stood out. This has probably been by far the best UFC-backed card they've had to date, right? It sold out, Madison Square Garden. Heck, the president was there. It was really interesting to hear Dana White in the post fight, to hear him talk about. Let me get some more light in here. To hear him talk about how he's friends with Trump and all that, whether you like him or not. I'm not getting into the politics of it, but it was interesting about Dana White and his connection to how in a roundabout way Donald Trump obviously saw that there was something there and he gave him a chance, and you got to watch the post fight. I'll even put a link on there. So that was very interesting, right? The storyline from that was tremendous, right? And then let's just get to the Jorge Masvidal Nate Diaz thing, okay? So all these undercards, they were great fights. Everybody won that was supposed to win for the most part, except Johnny Walker was a young and uppercutter, talking about he's going to beat John Jones. And John Jones went crazy on the Twitter, right? He had all his comments and everything like that. So that being said, it was a tremendous undercard. And then you have the main event, right? You have the main event where Nate Diaz, for the BMF, the baddest, mother effer in the land. The Rock was going to give the belt. They start fighting. It's a tremendous fight. If you got to watch the post-fight and have Nate, you got to listen to Nate Diaz. Was very interesting. His post-fight conversation, if you watch the fight, at first you say maybe he doesn't deserve a rematch, right? Maybe they don't want to run it back, right? But if you watch the fight and you listen to him talk about the fight in the post-fight news conference, it makes sense. It swayed my concept of how the fight ran, because I watched the fight again and it made sense that he does deserve a rematch, right? It is true. I can't remember who posted this, because I've been reading so much information about this fight, right? It was so interesting that the cut man on Nate Diaz's corner needs to come out stronger. What happened was, somebody said that the cut man needs to come out a little more convincing to let them fight. And I think that they were not prepared for the style, because Nate Diaz, there was another Instagram post where they showed the side by side of his cut, right? His cut, they showed a similar cut, and they didn't stop that fight. Well, it's your team, your corner is supposed to lobby for you to keep fighting, right? Obviously, there's that apprehension and fear that you're going to put your fighter in more unnecessary danger, but they're in the danger game. That's what they do. Right? So kudos to Nate Diaz for being able to articulate his case to be allowed to refight that fight, to redo that fight. Now, he needs to have some kind of special surgery. Dana White even alluded to it. See, I'm picking all these little gems up. I'm reading all the tea leaves, and I'm trying to put together kind of a story here, right? Dana White alluded to that his brother Nick Diaz, has some kind of surgery because he kept on getting cut too. So maybe Nate needs to have that surgery and heal properly, so that way that's not going to be the determining factor. So everything that Nate talked about in his post-fight news conference, when he broke down about how he didn't have a lot of cardio, about how he had to pace himself, about how he controlled the pacing, and that he noticed it. When you go back and you look at the fight, you can see what he was talking about, and there's tremendous validity to the fact that what he was saying made sense. Now, Masvidal, to his credit, went out and did what he said he was going to do, so you can't discredit. Nobody's taking anything away from Masvidal. He got the belt, and it was so funny the way Nate Diaz talked about this whole thing about The Rock, about he could beat up The Rock too, and he basically turned on The Rock because he basically was Masvidal's friend, but he's like, next time I need to have Mike Tyson. So Mike Tyson should be at this next fight, okay? I'm excited about this. When you hear both of them talk, Masvidal was eating pizza and took a drink, took a shot of mezcal tequila. He was like, dude, like he looked like Tony Montana in that whole thing, right? So these characters, these personalities, these entertainers, because that's what they are, which is Jorge Masvidal, and Nate Diaz. Even though Nate Diaz lost in that fashion, you can't take anything negative away from this experience, this fight. People have this opinion that this fight was garbage and this and that. You can't blame the refs. You can't get caught up in the weeds of the refs thinking that they purposely did something to this fight. No, dude. This was a tremendous event. It was very entertaining. There were compelling stories. The Rock announced he's gonna do a biopic about one of the legends of MMA that helped start it. The whole story was interesting. Kobe Covington said that he was gonna be there with the president, and that didn't happen because if you look at the post-fight news conference, Dana White even breaks that down. So that post-fight news conference gave a lot. It was an entertaining piece in itself. It was a good addition to the fight. I think you would be satisfied if you watch the fight and you watch the post-fight interview. I am going to put the link. It's a little lengthy. You can skip forward. There's a bunch of dead spots in there. But even if you give, Stephen Thompson, he's always kind of a bland character, but even he talked about how, these guys' confidence is not always 100%. We think these guys are bad, and they are. They're tremendous. It's tremendous to get out in the ring. I've never done that before. But the idea that it's easy to go out there and go do that, there are many, many, many factors. It was so interesting when Nate Diaz talked about his strategy when he knew that he was injured. See, that's the difference. That's the reason why, if you go back in time and you listen to Conor McGregor and the way that he did his things, when he got to all the money and the fighting and everything, when he was fighting, it didn't matter. When Dana White goes, he's there to fight, he's there. He can call him, he can do this, he can do this, he can do that. When you have that mentality, when Nate Diaz, you look at what Nate Diaz says, yeah, I got hurt, but you can't be no punk. And he just broke it down so eloquently. If you listen to what he's saying, it was a very interesting conversation, man. He was very candid there. Darren Till was very candid of talking about his fears, about his lack of confidence. It was so good. This whole fight as a whole, you can't take anything negative. The refs, the umps, the doctors, that was factor zero, okay? That's bound to happen. It's a possibility. You have to look at it in the whole scheme of things, right? It's in the biggest stage. It's in New York. It's like Dana White says, a couple years ago, they weren't even allowed in the state to fight. And now they had one of the biggest cards. Everything happened. It was very compelling. The storylines of the undercards, everybody having to win. Derek Lewis, like I said, Kevin Lee with that tremendous knockout. Those guys needed to win. They're known names. And now with the backing of ESPN, they need to be able to use this showcase and to catapult their careers, whether it's in the UFC or if it's getting sponsorships or brand deals or to branch off into other things. If you want to continue to be an entertainer after being a fighter, you have an opportunity now. ESPN is a force multiplier for the success that a fighter can have in mixed martial arts, okay? The UFC is a compelling, it's a very dynamic organization. You have a lot of other competing organizations now, but the backing of ESPN, and they really put the UFC in the forefront because it seems like it's the most polished organization that is out there. I still question all these organizations, their validity because of their drug testing policy. They should use exactly what the UFC uses, so that way you can level the playing field, because now you have a bunch of UFC people that have jumped ship and have gone to Bellator, or they've went to other organizations, and it's interesting how their results have changed because of these drug testing requirements that are either lifted or they're fighting people that don't follow the same protocols. There's a huge story in there, and I would like to explore that. So anyways, that being said, if you like this video, I was fired up about it. I wanted to film this. I think the rematch will be even better What I really want to see is how they're going to stack that undercard, okay? The undercard was very interesting this UFC. All the other ones are interesting, but they really put together a really good card as a whole, top to bottom. I was really impressed, and I really liked what they did. Like I said, check it out. But anyways, if you like this video, give it a thumb up, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. The second part of today's show is going to be on Facebook. I'm going to be recapping the Canelo, Kovalev, Garcia, Duno fights. Even though Garcia knocked out Duno, you know, whatever. I'm going to cover those. Watch it. Check the links below. Thanks for watching. Bye.